You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one-on-one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1315. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice you absolutely love. As you know, I am starting a private practice again, doing Great Lakes online counseling. I have been working with a bunch of my friends to work on it. Now, we aren't, unfortunately, exactly week to week where we should be. Eventually, we're going to get that all lined up. But today, I'm talking with John David Gardiner about starting a practice, the legal side. So we're talking about being licensed in other states. Can I file LLCs in a different state than where we're practicing? All that jazz. So let's dig in. All right. Welcome back to the interviews I've been doing over the last couple of weeks. This is week 4 that I'm spending 2 hours a week working on building a counseling practice that my idea is to try to sell it within 5 years or so, or to have so much passive income coming through it that it's just, why not just keep it going? So I'm interviewing people that I know in the industry. I have John Gardiner with me today from Bodeman Law, who, before we dive in, John, I know there's a couple qualifiers we want to talk about in regards to confidentiality when we talk about this publicly. So what do we need to tell the listeners before we get into some of my questions about kind of legal matters?
Yes. Good morning, Joe, and apologize by starting with the legalese, but obviously what we discuss wouldn't be privileged and confidential in that it is being publicly broadcast. That the privilege is always the clients or potential clients, and then additionally, the discussion, which I think is a great idea and will be iterative and informative. It doesn't constitute legal advice in that we're kind of generally talking about very nuanced topics. But with those two kind of big qualifiers out of the way, I really appreciate the opportunity. The law and those who practice it can get a little stale and can be behind in terms of what's happening in the market. And I think this is a great example of these are questions people have, and getting a letter and maybe going in for an overpriced cup of coffee isn't the best way to do it. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. So as I look at Great Lakes Online Counseling, a couple things I'm thinking about. So I'll tell you what I'm thinking, and you poke holes in it and tell me why it's legally wrong. So because it's going to be multi-state and potentially national, I'm thinking, so my accountant had recommended doing similar to Practice of the Practice, filing the LLC in Wyoming because it's online, it's not state specific, it's going to be all over the place. So that's kind of the first thing of is that smart if it's Great Lakes Online Counseling to have it filed in a state like Wyoming? Anything with the IRS I should be worried about? And then why don't we just start there? Because sure. I think then there's some spin-off questions that are going to be around if I hire a therapist in New York, if I hire a therapist in Pennsylvania, do I have to then create LLCs in each of those states? Or are there certain things I just file with the state as an outside business doing business with them? So we'll start with the business licensing side of stuff.
Absolutely. So I think in terms of the formation of the entity, Wyoming is one of several states that have protection and anonymity as to who the owner or members are. So because of that, individuals often gravitate towards Wyoming, Nevada, Delaware, and Texas in some respects. And I won't get into Tesla and Elon Musk, but Delaware had long been the gold standard in terms of a known body of corporate law. So entities in the state of Delaware really sought to market to entities so that people would form in Delaware. They would pay, annual renewals in Delaware, and that there was this very well-established body of law to the extent that there was any business dispute. And that has somewhat changed over time. The specific nuances, I think, are probably less important than the gating issue, which is, okay, this is, depending on the state, it's a professional limited liability company typically, right? It gives you entity protection and practice protection. Delaware doesn't have the PLLC equivalent. Its equivalent is a professional association or a PA. I think the biggest thing when you're focusing on starting something like Great Lakes is the idea of, okay, do I want to be taxed individually as a pass-through, or do I just know? And the answer is generally yes at the formation stage. Or do I know that I'm going to take on investors and I'm going to sell shares? And so if that's the case, then I really probably want a corporation, not a company, and I want to start that right away. With Great Lakes, I think Wyoming is a good choice, and I think a PLLC or an LLC is appropriate.
Do you know with Wyoming if they require the PLLC for licensed professionals?
Yes, I believe they do. Sorry, is that the question?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then,
so PLLC most likely there. Okay.
Yep, a PLLC most likely there, and then as part and parcel to that, because you are a counseling practice, right? Similar to attorneys or other licensed professionals. And I don't want to jump the question, but you are going to need to at least register potentially in states in which you are providing therapy services. So if you don't need Wyoming patients or clients to form a Wyoming entity, but to the extent that you're going in seeking marketing and treating folks, even telemedicine in, let's say, the state of Pennsylvania, then, to your upcoming question, I believe you would need to at least register in Pennsylvania, but you don't have to form a Pennsylvania PLLC right out of the gate.
And what does that registration typically look like? Are there any annual reporting, or is it just saying, hey, we're seeing these people in your state?
It's the former, not the latter. So typically it's, states are reluctant to give up potential revenue. So there's an annual, typically annual or biannual filing, a fee. Typically it's, fairly, $25, $50, $75 a year. Delaware can be higher, again, because it's a source of revenue for the state of Delaware. But typically it's a registration, and then you're certifying that I'm in good standing in Wyoming. This is what I'm seeking or doing here in Pennsylvania. And here's where you can find me to the extent that anyone ever needs to serve your entity through a registered agent or resident agent.
Cool. Yeah, we already have a registered agent in Wyoming for Practice of the Practice. So they've been great for, since the formation. So I'd probably just use them again because I know those systems, and they've been great with mail forwarding and mail scanning and all that sort of stuff. So it sounds like file in Wyoming, PLLC. When I hire my first people or I'm looking to hire in New York, Pennsylvania, Michigan, registering in those states as a foreign entity operating there. Anything I missed in that summary?
No, the summary is accurate, and I think in terms of the one of the gating issues for this discussion or future discussions. If you have individual employees in those states, then there are, registration requirements, FICA withholdings, et cetera. If you have 1099s in those states or in other states, then that's on the independent contractor, right? And so I think that is always an issue both in your sector and other sectors. It's the idea of, do I really need to go through the process of doing all this if I have one independent contractor in, state X? And the answer is no, as long as you're confident that it truly is an independent contractor. And that's something that you always want to keep a watchful eye on, to the extent that, into the future, this becomes an entity that you transition by way of a sale. Yeah.
Yeah. From talking to Dan King about eventually selling it and thinking about kind of long-term employees, it's sort of like, if they're just a 1099 with us, I think that puts us in the category of just like BetterHelp or other online platforms we're just another thing. Whereas I think the culture side of it is what we're seeing a lot of the value come from in the eventual sale. And we're we've seen quite a few places that had 1099s, and those were more traditional counseling practices just get dinged by the IRS. And so we're thinking about using, I say we, I have no team yet. I have the whole practice team, but
Joe,
like this is like
I'm on your team, but
yeah,
I also
John's
want
on
to
my
quickly.
team, Dan's on my kid team, like all these people that I'm interviewing. Maybe I should have stock options, have all of you be like personally invested in this company. But like when I'm thinking about like W-2s, for me, when I set that up with practice of me as an employee, Gusto was really great with kind of outlining all of that for me. Is that what you would recommend, when I go into something like this?
Yes. Yep. I think trying to take on all that back office, obviously there's a cost, but that is a reputable, well-known, I would say iterative and evolving third party, and you're not alone, right? They're doing this for other entities. Obviously, your specific entity is unique. We're all unique, and what you're doing, obviously, they're across many sectors. But I think that is by far the best route to go. And I think I was one humorous aside. Wyoming, I actually amend my answer. I don't believe they have PLLCs, so I think it would just be an LLC. But that's why this doesn't constitute legal advice. So
I can't come
things
back.
things on the fly, right? Yeah.
Something always comes up when you're running a private practice. Well, Gusto's payroll and HR services can make it a little easier. Gusto was designed for you, the small business owner. They take the pain out of running a business, automatically calculating paychecks, filing payroll taxes, setting up open enrollment. Gusto does it all. Want more? Time tracking, health insurance, 401k, onboarding, commuter benefits, offer letters, access to HR experts. You get the idea. With Gusto, you can focus on the joy of running your business. It's super easy to set up and get started. And if you're moving from another provider, Gusto can transfer all the data for you. It's no surprise 99% of businesses said the value they get for Gusto is worth the price. And here's the best part. Because you're a listener, you get 3 months totally free. All you have to do is go to gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. I'm telling you, you're going to love Gusto. Get started today. I guess the last part is just kind of open-ended. As I look at the first couple of hires, if I'm planning to do W-2, Pennsylvania, New York, Michigan are kind of the 3 states focusing on. After the website's up, we start to get some leads. The idea is that we'll probably have like a start date, like we're on a wait list until say January 1st. And then when we see that, we are getting some good traction in one of those states, then we start the hiring process to have someone start with say 5 to 10 sessions per week, having a fixed rate. So we want it to be about 40% of what we're collecting. So that would be, $65 a session, and then moving them into a part-time where they're averaging 15 sessions a week, and then having usually 5 non-clinical hours, so like 20 hours a week, set salary, and then bump up eventually to a 3/4 time full-time that kind of grows with them. That's the model I'm thinking. What problems do you see with that? What recommendations would you have in regards to just the legal side?
I never see problems, Joe. I just see opportunities. So when you think of the 3 states you've mentioned, and I'm state neutral, so you do want to be careful of unique state laws. And so what we typically see in employment and elsewhere, workplace law, the trends come from either coast and work inward, right? And so while I'm geographically challenged, New York has more vigorous employee benefits and requirements than would Pennsylvania or Michigan. And if you're looking west and coming east, California has very, very employee-friendly laws. And so you do want to be mindful of what state you're in. Obviously, how many employees you have may make a difference. It may not, right? The down and distance on employment laws is typically how many employees, right? It's 50 plus for FMLA. You're not there yet. You may never get there. But for work comp and for paid leave, it may and likely is 1 or more employees. So that's something in Augusto could assist with that. The other part, and I think this is overly complicated, and yet the Fair Labor Standards Act, which governs those salary exemption and overtime requirements, is antiquated. So a professionally exempt therapist, right, would be eligible for a set salary, and that could be part-time, full-time, but anytime you're giving someone a salary exempt position, and there can be hourly individuals paid by salary, but that's very nuanced. You want to make sure first that you're meeting the duties test. So is this truly a licensed professionally exempt employee? Or, is it someone, without credentialing who's, kind of doing their own thing? Obviously, you would have licensed professional therapists, so you could choose to pay them a set salary, and then you want to make sure you get the salary threshold, which is gone up and down, and I'm getting esoteric, but it is currently the same 35 approximate thousand per year, and you can do a pro rata based on a part-time set schedule. But I think this is where kind of the Google legal advice can get us a little bit. You can get a lot of information, ChatGPT, and some of it applies and some of it doesn't. And so I guess I'm giving a sales pitch to my profession. But
give me the legal but easier way to understand the salary exempt, like what you just said.
Sure.
What would be the quick, that 2 or 3 sentence, just here's kind of how that would mean practically with my first or second hire.
Perfect. Yep. So what are they doing and how do we want to pay them? Right. And okay. So you can always...
let me answer those as we go. So 15 hours or so average of counseling. And then say they're at 17, they would get up to 20 hours that they'd be working. So so if they're at 12 hours a week of counseling, they'd have, 8 hours of non-clinical time, doing networking, writing blogs, things like that. If they're at 17, then they'd only have 3 hours of non-clinical. So 20 hours cap for the part-time.
Yes. So you can always treat an employee as a non-exempt employee. Right. And if you do that, you have to pay them the set hourly rate above state minimum wage. States are always going to be higher than the federal minimum wage. And then time and a half for anything worked in a week of 40 hours. So you could choose to pay hourly to these individuals. You may have a difficult time. There's kind of a connotation to, no, I'm a professional. I get a salary. If you choose to pay them a salary, you could, agree to this reduced hourly structure, or you could ask them to work 80 hours in a week. They're getting the same pay. The big thing is you just want to make sure that they meet the duties tests, which they would if they're professionally, licensed and accredited individuals, and that they have certain discretion within the organization. So I think those are I don't know if I'm making it more complicated or easier.
No, so what I'm hearing is if there's a part-time person. So some of the math I've done is if we're averaging 150, paying them about $60 per session times 15 hours would be $900 a week. And then $25 an hour for non-clinical time, which is $1,025 a week. So we would just divide that out by 20 hours, have it be hourly for that. But then they're getting the same salary every other week.
Okay. Yep. So that's the kicker, right? Because you could just, you can always convert as long as they meet the duties test. You could just start them as an hourly, right? And that's, it's easier to track. Here's, your non session rate, your piece rate, and here's your session rate. But if you want them to get the same consistent salary, then they would either be an hourly, a salaried non-exempt or salaried exempt. And the only difference, Joe and team, is really you have to meet the duties test, which they would as professionals, and then the idea of what hours you would expect them to work. But I think the way that you've just described it would be fine and would be legally permissible.
Okay. And the whole non-exempt versus exempt, that duties test, is one considered easier when you're first starting out? There's less regulations or things like that?
I think in this space, I'm probably making a bigger issue out of it than I need to. I think what you commonly see, though, is individuals that don't meet the typical 3 or the white collar, so to speak, exemptions, the executive, administrative, or professional. I think one quick example is the manager at your favorite fast food chain is an executive for purposes of salary exempt, so long as they have discretion on hiring, firing, and scheduling and manage 2 or more employees, not including themselves. So that is an area that is fraught with misclassification, because what we've seen over time is if they were being paid hourly, they would make more than 35 a year, right? But businesses want the benefit of the bargain, which is we can ask you to work 90 hours a week as long as you meet the exemption, and we pay you 35,568 a year, and that's where the winds of change are blowing in terms of, do we need to increase the duties, increase the salary exemption? Do we want to change the duties? Do we want to call, is a professionally exempt therapist at risk for being underpaid? No, probably not. Is this manager at your favorite fast food chain at risk for being underpaid? Yes, they probably are. I think in this space that the issue is just making sure if someone is a professional and you meet the duties test, the Department of Labor has many quick, easy reference guides just to make sure, okay, yep, we meet the exemption, right? You and I meet the professional exemption. Then we just need to make sure that we are, accurately paying someone. And if we're doing a salary, the employee always gets the benefit of the pay. So as long as they're not being underpaid, as long as they're getting kind of the benefit but not the detriment, then you're in good shape.
So it sounds like really when we get to the point of having like clinical supervisors, clinical directors, that's when we would really want to make sure we do that right. Yes. Not that we don't want to do it right at the beginning, but as the team grows, definitely want to make sure we talk through those issues. So, okay, cool. Anything else I missed in regards to just startup phase that you would want to make sure that I'm thinking about? I've got the LLC in Wyoming, registering in each state. Maybe New York isn't in the first three. Maybe especially Great Lakes states, thinking about which ones touch the Great Lakes. Maybe we'll focus on some of those. But anything else that we missed?
No, I think it can be daunting, and I think the advisors are just that. So don't let someone talk you into or out of something when you have a great concept. You don't need the world's greatest handbook or the gold standard legal memorandum out of the gate. Obviously, you do want to get it right away, but I think forming an entity, working with a third-party administrator for payroll and individual state licensing is important. And then I think it's just one of those where whatever cadence makes sense, maybe it's biannual, annual at least, just checking in with legal, right? Just like you would check in, as you mentioned, Joe, it's typically here's what the tax professional's saying, here's what the legal counsel's saying, here's what the third-party pay administrator's saying. It's your concept, it's your baby. Let people help you, but don't delegate the idea to any of those three professionals, because you're going to end up with a giant bill for things that you may not even need in year one, or maybe even in year 5.
Oh, so awesome, John. Thanks so much for your time today. This has cleared up so much legal stuff. And I know that I'll have you back on as we go past week 4.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Today's episode was sponsored by Gusto. Gusto is who we use for our payroll solutions. I absolutely love it because it helps do all the taxes and file everything, and I don't have to worry about having a whole accounting team or bookkeeping team that's doing that payroll. So try gusto.com/Joe. You're going to get 3 months totally free. It's going to help you with your payroll and so many other things like doing open enrollment, filing payroll taxes, calculating paychecks, all that sort of stuff you can do with Gusto. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.